The year of 1298 had witnessed the humbling of William Wallace, less than a year after his initial triumph at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. However, the defeat of Wallace's Chilterns at Falkirk was far from decisive, with even Wallace himself escaping the slaughter. Yet even as the battered kingdom of Scots entered its fourth year of war with England, another hero had already made moves to position himself as a great champion of his people. The famed future Scots king Robert the Bruce was born in 1274 during the years of peace and prosperity under King Alexander III. Robert was the son of Robert de Bruce, the 6th Lord of Annandale, who was himself the son of Robert the Competitor, later rival of John Balliol, for the then vacant throne of Scots. For this series, we used different sources in an effort to avoid bias, and I'd also like to thank all of you for your positive and negative comments that helped us stay objective. But just like with history, navigating information about modern events can be a challenge, which is why I'm happy to welcome back a returning sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a news comparison platform that gives you the breaking news as it happens, but it also shows you the sources and discloses the political leaning of those sources. This can be really important because, as you know, understanding the news about the war in Ukraine can be confusing, and that's because the same facts can be presented in completely different ways depending on who is presenting them. So knowing where the news is coming from is as important as knowing the news itself. Let's take this story as an example about the ongoing campaign in the major Ukrainian city of Kherson. Ground News gives you a brief overview of what the story contains, and then it shows you 31 different news outlets that cover this story right now. From there, you can then see the political leaning of each source and the reliability of their reporting practices. But Ground News also shows you if a story is shown more on the left, or the right, or the center, thereby pointing out potential biases and blind spots, which then helps you, the reader, to easily weigh in the information and draw your own conclusions. For me, Ground News is essential for understanding the news in an objective way, and I'm very happy to have them back on as a sponsor. So if you're looking for a better way to stay informed and would like to help support my channel, then use the link in the description below, which is ground.news/historymarsh, to download the app and get started. In 1292, the Bruces had seemingly lost their chance of kingship, with Edward Longshanks's election of John as king. Robert and his family naturally sided with Edward as he heaped pressure on the Scots to support him financially and militarily in his wars as Scotland's overlord. In the event, John's short reign proved unsuccessful, the nobles in his kingdom seizing control by 1295 and forming an alliance with France, King Edward's greatest enemy. 1296 set the seal on Balliol's failure as a monarch, Edward himself having John ritually stripped of the crown and occupying the kingdom after a brief struggle. Documents ominously began to refer to the land of Scotland as opposed to a kingdom, and now the throne was effectively vacant with Balliol's exile. It may have been around this time that Robert began to seriously reignite his own family's ambitions for the throne. As the summer of 1297 approached, the Bruces remained rooted in their English allegiance. Having heard of the defection of Sir William Douglas to Wallace's cause, King Edward sent word to Carlisle for the elder Bruce to send his son north to raise the men of Annandale and seize Douglas's castle. Robert dutifully obliged, though en route he had a change of heart. At Douglas Castle, the young Bruce gathered his men about him and said, "No man holds his flesh and blood in hatred, and I am no exception. I must join my own people and the nation in which I was born. Choose then whether you go with me or return to your homes." Many of the knights present chose the latter, feeling a stronger influence in their pledges to King Edward, and that their lord, the elder Bruce, also still held to his alliance, and thus departed. Robert, however, marched northeast through his own domain of Carrick, recruiting as he went, and later joined the steward and Bishop Wishart at Irvine. Irvine proved a dismal false start for Bruce's own intentions. As a formidable force of armoured knights under Percy and Clifford approached, dissension in the overall resistance crumbled the rebel resolve. Unlike Wallace and Andrew de Moray, both fighting their own campaigns elsewhere, James Stewart, Robert Wishart and others considered the Balliol claim dead, given John's unkinging the year before. Facing a powerful force disunited with their own army of mostly footmen, cracked the resolve of the rebels at Irvine. On 9th of July 1297, the Bruce, along with the other leaders, agreed to surrender to King Edward's peace, though Robert did not hand over his infant daughter as hostage, remaining in rebellion and deprived of his lands. As for the elder Bruce, he was deprived of his governorship of Carlisle and retired to his English lands until his death in 1304. During Wallace's short-lived wave of success, it was Robert who dubbed him a knight in his base of Selkirk Forest and supported his being made guardian of Scotland by his own and a collective agreement of all the lords, bishops and leaders present. Following Falkirk, the Bruce himself was made joint guardian of the realm with his great rival John Comyn of Badenoch, also known as the Red Comyn. The Comyn family had been staunchly loyal to the Balliol claim, proving a colossal obstacle to any Bruce claim, holding extensive lands and power beyond the Tay. Falkirk was a stinging defeat, but hardly a signal of full conquest. Edward simply did not have the numbers to fully occupy the land, his control concentrated in the southeast. In Scotland, the civil government continued, though the fragile alliance soon disintegrated, Bruce resigning his post in 1300. Though Edward could not prevent the loss of Stirling Castle in 1299, he continued to campaign during his last years, the English army invading the southwest from Carlisle in 1300. Both Edward and his heir, Edward of Carnarvon, invading in 1301, and Edward also marching as far north as Kinloss Abbey in 1303. On the 22nd of April 1304, Edward initiated the siege of Stirling Castle. In March of the same year, John Comyn and around 100 Scots nobles formally swore homage and fealty to Edward. The surrender of the kingdom's leading men and the loss of the key castle of Stirling was not the limit of an independent Scotland's ill fortune, as in August of 1305, the victor of Stirling Bridge himself was captured, eventually suffering the horrific sentence of hanging, drawing and quartering. Wallace's head was set above London Bridge, his body butchered and displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling and Perth. Meanwhile, a shred of hope for a united front against the English emerged in the summer of 1305. Clandestine negotiations between the Red Comyn and Bruce produced a shaky agreement premised on the understanding that one should receive the estates of the other in exchange for one of them becoming king. At the time, Edward was seriously ill in England and in the event would never set foot in Scotland again, which perhaps reinforced the urgency of an agreement. Edward's recovery may have caused Comyn to rethink his position. The whole matter was brutally concluded at the infamous meeting at Greyfriars Monastery on February 10th, 1306. Bruce accused Comyn of treachery, causing the two men to come to blows despite being on sacred ground. Near the high altar, the confrontation ended with Robert stabbing his rival to death, though it was possible a retainer actually finished Comyn off. The gravity of the murder was huge. Robert had killed one of the most powerful men in Scotland in a church, a highly sacrilegious act, an act which would have severe consequences later on. Now all in on his path to the crown, Robert captured Dumfries Castle. The Bruce moved quickly, riding to the bishops William Lamberton and Robert Wishart, who, though supportive, likely viewed Bruce's action to seize the throne untimely as their greatest threat in Edward Longshanks still lived and would inevitably move to destroy them. The bishop fully threw his support behind him by formally absolving him of Comyn's murder. Bruce's endorsement by the church may on the surface appear odd, given such an egregious act. However, Scotland's leading clergymen had always proved a solid bulwark of resistance to what they perceived as inevitable English dominion over them if Edward's designs for a Wales North succeeded. On 25th of March 1306, Robert the Bruce was crowned King Robert I of Scotland in Scone. The ailing Edward Longshanks was furious with the news and sent his lieutenant Aymer de Valence, the Earl of Pembroke, as well as his son Edward to punish the errant Bruce. Prince Edward infamously marched under the dragon banner, flown to indicate that the usual rules of chivalry were suspended, and so Robert could expect no mercy. Valence quickly established his camp at Perth by June, with his army drawn from men of the northern counties, making up a sizable 3,000 men. As might be expected, Pembroke's host was eagerly supplemented by Comyn's supporters. King Robert, though, was not idle, and moved with around 4,500 men to confront Valence in Perth on June 18th. There demanding the Earl came out and do battle. Unfortunately for him, it's likely King Robert had not heard news of Edward's raising of the dragon banner, or his declaration of him as an outlaw, significantly changing the context of any encounter. Pembroke answered by denying the offer of battle, claiming it was too late in the day, and that they would fight on the morrow. The Bruce knew Pembroke as an honourable man, and accepted, withdrawing his own force into the woods near Methven, trusting to the rules of engagement and not posting scouts. That same evening, Pembroke attacked, his force containing large numbers of archers and cavalry. The Scots, who were largely dispersed, unarmed and unarmoured, proved unequal to Pembroke's men. The royal army fought ferociously to barely enable their king to flee. Robert himself was said to have personally unhorsed Pembroke during the melee, but was in turn himself unhorsed 3 times before making his escape. Most of Robert's army were not so lucky. Of the 4,500 men who fought at Methven, some 4,000 were either slain or taken captive. This heavy defeat was only compounded with another hard blow struck by the MacDougall clan, Comyn loyalists, at the Battle of Dalray, further reducing Robert's following. This opening few months of Robert's reign proved the nadir of his fortunes. News soon reached him that Prince Edward had seized Kildrummy Castle, commanded by his brother Neil. Neil held out for a time. This action initially enabled the Bruce's womenfolk to escape north to Tain. However, the Earl of Ross, a Comyn sympathiser, sent his men to capture them, sending them south into English captivity. Throughout the winter, he waited off the mainland, possibly on the island of Arran. Such a catastrophic reversal would have broken any ordinary man. Yet, in true Alfredian style, Robert planned his comeback. Given his small numbers, he couldn't hope to win a conventional war against the English. Dalray also proved he had troubles enough, with domestic enemies too. Therefore, Bruce decided to take on the latter first. At Loch Ryan, Alexander and Thomas Bruce were both defeated by the men of Dungal MacDougall and later executed. With the foray into Galloway cut brutally short, the Bruce finally met with success in his own invasion of Annandale, where he could count on strong local support. Evading a local English garrison, Bruce scored his first minor victory at Turnberry, defeating the men of Henry de Percy in the outskirts of the castle, eventually forcing Percy's withdrawal. Aymer de Valence soon moved to counter him, likely aware of the king's small numbers and hoping to pin down and crush him. Robert's capture would hopefully snuff out Scottish resistance for good. The Bruce, though, also knew this, and so wisely chose carefully where to confront his enemy. In April of 1307, this approach proved fruitful. Valence received intelligence that the Bruce was based at the head of Glentrool, and perhaps wanting to repeat his tactic of surprise, moved in for the kill. The area was basically a narrow track with a steep slope overlooking it, and down which Pembroke sent his cavalry. Robert sent his own men up the slope, having them loosen rocks and boulders down onto the English, inflicting heavy casualties. This barrage was followed by deadly volleys from the Bruce's archers, and maybe even a general charge, which caused Pembroke's general withdrawal. Glentrool boosted the morale of the Bruce's followers, yet did not diminish Pembroke's resolve as he pursued the king to Loudon Hill. Up to this point, Robert had fought small guerrilla-type engagements, but now chose to fight a potentially ruinous pitched battle, despite being heavily outnumbered and with arguably inferior men. The Bruce had next to no cavalry, while the Earl of Pembroke's 3,000 troops were almost exclusively horse. However, this number and value imbalance was lessened by Robert's clever use of terrain. He deployed his men on elevated land, flanked by boggy ground, with some woods guarding his rear and to the right of the advancing English. These natural features served the purpose of funneling the English assault into a single, predictable direction. Robert formed his infantry into schiltrons, well suited to facing Valence's probable cavalry charges. Robert also had his men dig trenches. The result was nothing short of a medieval car crash in which men, horse, and cold steel meshed into a bloody and muddled mess. The battle, though, was still hard fought, with King Robert himself, along with his brother Edward, and a Black Douglas leading his men in melee. After several hours, the schiltrons continued to hold, and with no possibility of flanking the stubborn Scots, Pembroke ordered a withdrawal. King Robert's victory at Loudon Hill was an unambiguous defeat for the English, inflicting hundreds of casualties and, more importantly, confirming Robert the Bruce as the nexus of Scots resistance to English domination. The Bruce's cause was only enhanced soon after by the death of his greatest threat, King Edward Longshanks, on July 7th, which saw the crown of England and Longshanks' ambitions pass on to his untested heir, Edward of Carnarvon. Loudon Hill arguably marked the true turning point of the First War of Scottish Independence, though the Scots would have to grind on for several more years before reducing the English presence in their land down to a handful of castles, though by 1307, King Robert was already set on the glorious road to his greatest triumph at Bannockburn. If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm. You can also support us on Patreon and get ad-free early access to our videos for as little as $1, or by clicking the thanks button below to leave a one-time tip. As always, we'll see you in the next one.